You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This premium episode is brought to you by XDEEP and the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. I am extraordinarily grateful to both for their support that makes all of this possible. Well, it's been a very busy last month, and yes, I am well and truly behind in my current schedule. Huge apologies for that. Various business issues have conspired against me, and on a brighter note, I've been able to sneak away for diving a fair bit this month, which has been really cool. I've been building hours on the KISS Sidewinder, and I've been using this time to work on video projects on my second home, the Canterbury Wreck. Shoot over to the Sidemount Pros YouTube channel if you'd like to take a look. And so on with this episode. When I think back to when I started diving in my teens in the 70s and early 80s, it was such a different landscape to what we have now. For better or for worse, we learned to dive at our local dive shop, some run by ex-military or commercial divers, others by enthusiasts inspired like many of us by Jacques Cousteau, or in our case in New Zealand by treasure hunters like Kelly Tarleton or marine conservationists like Wade Doak. There was no internet, no social media, so you really only knew what you knew and what you were directly exposed to. I used to buy books and devour them for more information about diving. I was in the Navy, and while not a Navy diver, I'd watch how they operated and take note for my own diving. Meanwhile, around the world, a group of phenomenal divers, the modern-day pioneers I like to call them, were exploring caves and deep wrecks, and along the way developing what we now know as technical diving. When they couldn't buy it, they'd build their own equipment, and they developed the skills, the techniques, and let's call them the rules by which we dive today. The trouble was, unless you happened to know of these divers or see them in a documentary, you had no idea it was even happening. I contrast that with the landscape enjoyed by today's young divers. Information is ubiquitous. They can find a vast amount of content on every type of diving. They can find websites, they can read blog articles, watch video, live streams, webinars, and yes, listen to podcasts on diving. They can join Facebook groups, arrange diving hookups, and COVID accepted, travel the world seeking out diving adventures and training. It's an amazing time to be diving, I believe, and yet in this information age, there are still issues. The problem now is not about access to information or knowledge, it's about deciphering what is good from what is not. There is so much information available that it's hard to know where to turn. I've said it many times, this is really one of the key tenets of Speaking Sidemount, to bring you the best information from the world's best, to provide a platform whereby you really can discover the information you need. Applying this to young divers, this could almost be a, here's the path, here are the teachers, and here's the information to support you. So in this vein, when Darren Mitchell of TDI in Australia reached out to me to tell me about a young South Australian diver that he'd met, I was super excited. His message to me was, I've come across a diver in South Australia who is a machine, got all the right gear, practicing every weekend in a little sidemount club in Adelaide called Sidemount Sunday. They invited me along last Sunday. What a fantastic community of divers, all teched up and loving life. Hayun Yung is new to sidemount, but is practicing as much as she can while she waits her 12 months as a diver so that she can start her cave training. Her partner is also a tech diver and is helping her out along the way with direction, but it's all her in the water and above. She is very good. She would no doubt put 90% of tech divers to shame with her level of commitment and trim. Well, my excitement about sharing my conversation with Hayun is all about having found someone who is developing as a diver the right way. And as you'll hear, we talk about how she got into diving, how she trains, the support that she gets from her partner and the local community. And then we get into a huge Q&A where Hayun asks about achieving correct weighting, trim, and balance. We talk about using AI transmitters and also about using video as a development tool. All of this and much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. We are recording. So Hayun, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure. Now, Darren Mitchell put me onto you, and I want to just read back to you what he said to me because I became extremely interested in you as a guest on my show when I read what Darren had to write. And he said this, He said, I've come across a diver in South Australia who is a machine, got all the right gear, practicing every weekend in a little Sidemount club in Adelaide called Sidemount Sunday. What a fantastic community of divers, all teched up and loving life. Hayun is relatively new to Sidemount, 6 months, but is practicing as much as she can while she waits for the 12 months to come up for her cave training. And he goes on and on saying, he talks about your partner giving you some direction, but he said it's all her in the water and above, and she's very good. No doubt would put 90% of tech divers to shame. That's a pretty big wrap to start things off. So why don't we start by telling us a little bit about how you got into diving?
I originally came from South Korea, a small city where it's not really easy to see the ocean. And then I've never seen myself swimming or diving in the ocean. It was something always I need to see or look around. And then after spending some time in America studying, and I've got a job opportunity here, I was exposed to ocean, and it was really close to where I live, Adelaide. And my partner does cave diving. So yeah, when I was jobless and homeless, I wanted to do something good for myself. And diving was one of the things that I could possibly do, I think. So yeah, I did my open water last year, November, and did my advanced open water right away, and just started diving and got involved in a local university dive club here, do some boat dives. And yeah, first I tried side mounting, just learning basics from my partner. Then I went to a trip to Mount Gambier. There are a lot of cave divings. So I think I was early exposed to cave diving. And I was just sitting out there waiting for them to come out and then have meals. And I've listened to what they're talking about. And I got interested in side mounting. So I did a course in Mount Gambier shop. And that's where it all started.
Awesome. And I guess once you catch that bug, it becomes quite compelling, doesn't it?
Yep.
Your partner's a cave diver. You mentioned that. What about cave diving excites you?
It doesn't excite me yet. But I was always bored, just waiting outside for them to come out and just hanging around with them. And I had no friend here. I made my friends through diving, and most of them are cave divers. So I was always interested in their motives, like what makes them so excited to go down every week or like every month when it takes like 5 hours to go there.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I would like it or not yet, although I've got some equipment and all that stuff, but would love to explore this year if it's possible.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, whenever I talk to someone about being a cave diver, they say, oh, I could never do that. I would never want to do that. And of course, these feelings of claustrophobia and being jammed at a really small hole in the ground are what they're thinking of. But the beginnings of cave diving really aren't very much like that. So it's very much you're going into caverns first and you're learning the protocols and everything for cavern diving before you even go towards a cave. So you kind of take baby steps. And I think that's what most people miss, is that nobody wakes up one morning and says, hey, I want to be a cave diver. It's kind of a progression of I'm a diver and then I want to take my diving a little further. And then for me, it was just looking at the skill level. And it sounds like that's where you're progressing right now, is really working on your skill level. Darren mentioned how much practice you're doing. And I think the help you're getting from your partner and other tech divers in your community really helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I did my deep course with Darren. And that's, I think, my first experience diving in sort of cavern sinkhole. I think you may have visited there, Kilsby.
Yeah, I love Kilsby. It's awesome. Yeah. Apart from the stairs are not so much fun, but the sinkhole itself is amazing.
Yeah, that's really steep. Yeah, so my partner goes like, if you really like diving here, you might be interested in cave diving. So that's why I wanted to try. I did my course there, and the water temperature was so cold. And I was crying inside the water. And I'm like, I'm going out. I cannot do this anymore. Yeah. So I think that's what Darren remembers of me. Like this crying little girl, couldn't hold the temperature. And
Were you in a wetsuit?
Yes, I was in a wetsuit.
Oh, that's not, I don't think that's really doable. I mean, in your defense, it's 12 or 14 degrees or something. So that's definitely dry suit country there.
Yeah, that's when I get rental suit, like dry suit right away.
Yes.
And then it felt more comfortable. And yeah, and then this is not bad. I tried side mounting in Ewan's ponds as well, and I really loved it. It's way more balanced than back mounting. Everyone sort of told me, this is good that you're enjoying it. We have this little community, Side Mount Sundays. We have this Facebook group here, and then most of them are doing side mount and some are cave divers. So I can get a lot of feedback from them and some advice with equipment. So every dive for me is like practice, and there's a little task that I want to achieve and goals. So I think that's what keeps me interested.
Yeah, and for anyone out there who's a new or young diver, that's a great method for becoming really good. And I'm not surprised that you're progressing really quickly, because we talk a lot about experience and years of experience and all this sort of thing, but you can progress really quickly in diving if you're taught the right way and if you practice consistently and always set yourself little tasks for each dive. So what you're doing is exactly the way that you become really competent really fast. Steve Bogart said this in the last episode. You can build skills really fast. You can't build experience really fast. And experience is really when you take those skills, let's say you take them into a cave or something and you have issues during a dive. That's a learning experience, right? And until you actually have done the dives, you can't get that. But what you can do is build the skill level. And so you can only focus on what you can do. And I think somebody who, number one, is taught the right way, who receives guidance and feedback, and who asks the right questions and is prepared to listen. And then the other thing, who sets little goals and tasks and says, this is the thing I want to work on. But I'm not surprised at all that you're progressing really quickly. And it's a credit to you. The method that you're going about this is exactly how you should. I reflect back, I didn't start this sort of diving until I was much, much older, because, well, I started diving when I was 14. That was in the 70s. Oh, okay. In the 70s, there was nothing like this. I mean, side mount was being done, but only in the UK. All I knew was single cylinder back mount, and everybody dived in a very, very different way to how we dive today. Of course, we didn't have the equipment, we didn't have the communities, we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet. So there was no real way to gain knowledge the way we can today. And so I think young divers, to me, it's really exciting that you're able to, number one, have all of that knowledge available to you, but then it's a matter of what you do with it. So I just love what you're doing. So tell me a bit more about Side Mount Sunday, because I love the sound of that community. I think there should be more of those.
It's only like recent, one of the cave divers started doing it, and he is such a big fan of Steve Martin. I haven't watched all the videos, but I think he learned a lot from them. And also my partner taught me a lot, and they usually give me this feedback, like you need to adjust your tank bend, or you need to do this at the time. So that's how I make little changes every practice, every weekend, if I can dive, if conditions is good. These days I'm working on my weights, because I recently bought my dry suit and trying to adjust which weight would be perfect for me. And yeah, all the other divers are also, there are not many sites here in South Australia, maybe 2 or 3 that we can easily go. So there's one in Rapid Bay, one in Port Noarlunga, or sometimes Wallaroo. That's where people usually go. Yeah, that's about it, I think.
Are these shore diving sites?
Yes, all of them.
Yeah, and Mount Gambier is such a great place for that. You mentioned that it's so easy there, and I hope anyone who's in Mount Gambier or somewhere like that appreciates what they've got, because it's just awesome to be able to throw your gear in the back of the car and drive to a site and get out and jump in. And you do have to go through a bit of rigmarole with approvals and so on, but once you're there, it's very easy, isn't it?
From what I've heard, it's like 10 steps from parking space.
Some of them,
enter right away, but I don't know. My diving experience is only limited to Australia, like South Australia. So I'm not sure what other sites are like.
Yeah, in New Zealand, we have a similar thing. So there's a limited number of shore diving sites that are almost always affected by the weather to some degree. So, I mean, if you get really nice calm weather, then some shore diving sites open up, but they're not all easy to access in terms of getting your gear to the water. So we do a lot of boat diving for that reason. But of course, as soon as you introduce a boat, you introduce more cost. And usually you work with an operator, so there's more cost again. So that definitely is a factor. But if I contrast other parts of the world, I mean, if you're in any of the cave diving regions, certainly the ones that I've been to, such as Florida or Mexico, Sardinia less so because you're boat diving the caves there. Even Gozo, we're shore diving virtually all the time. And it's just so nice to be able to throw your gear in the back of a truck, drive to the water's edge, gear yourself up and nice and relaxed, and then take your cylinders to the water, don them in the water and go away. So a lot of Steve Martin's videos are shot in Gozo. So that gives you an example of what it's like there. And I met Steve several times and dived with him a few times there as well. And yeah, it's a really neat place. And so those locations are fantastic for progressing really fast just because you have access to easy diving. You know, for the rest of us, we've got to kind of make the time and make the effort to get to a site, but it can still be done, of course. Brilliant. So you mentioned that you're working at the moment on weighting. So, I mean, we can perhaps go through that for a few minutes and talk through what you're doing. Steve Martin has a great video, if anyone hasn't seen it, on how to assess the correct weighting, both in wetsuits and dry suits and with steel cylinders and aluminium cylinders. But what process are you going through right now to sort out your weighting?
I started with the minimal weights I thought I would need. And then I still had problem going down. So I'm just keep adding weights. And recently, I think I've tried like 7 kilo, maybe 6 to 7 kilo, because I'm wearing Halo 3D undergarments.
Yeah, big thick one. Yeah.
Yeah, which I heard has a lot of like air in it. So yeah, with 2 steel cylinders. Yeah, I think it sort of worked out for me, but obviously it'll be different if I go to Mount Gambier and diving in a fresh water.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Appreciate if you give me some tips.
The way that I learned and I evolved the way that I did this over time, but it's pretty much the same way that Steve Martin does it. And the most effective way to assort your weighting is firstly to take your cylinders down to between 30 and 50 bar so that you're not playing with gas weight, both cylinders here. And the reason for that is that's going to be the lightest time during your dive is when you've lost the gas weight from both of your cylinders. So at that point, if you weight yourself correctly for that, and don't forget at the end of a dive, you probably will have a bit more gas than 50 bar in your cylinders, depending on the duration of it. But if you need to use all of that gas because you've gone into contingency or you're just doing a really long dive, then you don't want to find where you're trying to hold a stop at 6 meters or 3 meters and you can't do that because you're too light. So that's the correct time to weight yourself is with both cylinders at, let's say, 50 bar. Drain the cylinders to 50 bar and then just super relax, take yourself down to 3 meters, relax and see what happens. Steve has a thing which is fantastic where he looks at having an 80% lung volume, a 50% lung volume and a 20% lung volume. So with a 80% lung volume, if you're correctly weighted, you should start to rise slowly. Okay, with a 20% lung volume, you should start to descend slowly. And with 50%, you should stop and be neutral. And so what that means is that you can do kind of 50% breathing, which is kind of like pretty much a nice, easy breath in and out, and you'll be able to hold a level at 50%. If you want to rise a little bit, then you carry a little bit more lung volume and you'll go up. If you want to sink a little bit, you carry a little less lung volume and you'll go down. So if you test yourself at 80% lung volume, see if you go up, 50% you should stop, 20% you should go down. So that's when you're doing those last adjustments. Yes, you do need to make a guess first and say, let's say it's 6 kilos, 7 kilos, or 8 kilos, whatever you're going to start with, and then do that test at 50 bar. What you'll find once you've got that correct is that you can hold 3 meters. You can do it at 6 if you want to as well. Between 3 and 6 meters, you can hold that with 50% lung volume and just stay still. Your BCD should be empty and you should have just enough gas in your dry suit to keep the squeeze off. Those are the other 2 caveats to that. So once you've got that right, what you're going to find at the beginning of the dive is because you've got the gas weight in your cylinders, you're actually going to be a little negative. But it shouldn't be too much. It's only like 1 kilo or 2 in each cylinder of gas weight. So you're going to be a couple of kilos heavy at the beginning of the dive. That's what your BCD is for, is to compensate for that. And then towards the end of the dive, as you come up to 3 to 6 meters, BCD empty, just enough gas in your dry suit. Does that make sense? Okay. So you mentioned that you're working on your weighting. What other things are you working on in your diving at the moment?
Another issue that I have at the moment is my boots. So I made a mistake when I ordered boots. But anyway, it's inbuilt boots.
Yes.
That's attached to the suit. And I'm not sure if I'm using wrong fins or inbuilt boots is the problem. But I also heard I need to change it to like socks. And boots like separately. But I'm very lazy and I want to put on like everything at the same time. So that's why I try not to use socks system.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm not sure what's the best.
I use boots that are included as part of my dry suit.
What
For
dry
instance,
suit do you use?
SF Tech from
Oh,
Switzerland.
okay.
So a lot of the divers in Gozo and Europe use it. It's not very easily attainable in Australia or New Zealand, but it's a really, really high quality European suit. But there's others as well, of course. Mine was custom fitted, which is really important, I think, because if you have lots of excess material in your suit and it doesn't fit you well, then you're going to get gas accumulating in areas that you may not want it. When I got mine done, it wasn't one of the decisions that I made. And I know Tom Steiner, for instance, he has separate boots with socks. And the issue that he was explaining to me was that you don't want gas accumulating in your feet. It can cause you problems.
Oh, I thought it would be the other way.
No, it's not. The reason that I went with fitted boots was a little bit like yours. I sort of wanted something that was part of it. And the other thing is if you do dive really cold water, it's warmer with fitted boots than with socks in the other boots because you have undergarments and socks in there. And so you can layer them up. And so they tend to be warmer. Plus you can get some gas in there, which with boots on, you don't tend to get very much gas in there. So the issue normally is, okay, if you get gas in there, now how do you adjust and compensate for that? Now, I've got some straps that go around my ankles that prevent too much gas going in there. And what I find is the only time I really have an issue with getting gas in there is if I'm going completely head down. And usually that's happening in a shipwreck or a cave where I'm descending head first and I have no other option. Normally, if I'm descending in open water, I'm descending in trim like a parachutist. But if I'm descending down somewhere where you can't do that, then you have to go head first. And so, yes, a bit of gas gets up there, but I just go, okay, there's gas in my feet, so. And you swim down, and then when you can, the way to get your feet back down is just pull your knees down and pull your shoulders up. And so that lets the gas move from the limbs, from your legs into the middle of your body and then to your shoulders, and you're back in trim again. So I don't have any trouble with it at all, but I have heard that people do.
I can get better if I practice more?
Yes, I do. You can put gaiters around them, like complete wraps around them. And that will, again, help prevent gas from going in there if you're having an issue with too much gas going in. But it is just a bit of a practice thing, I think. And later on, especially if you're finding that you're getting cold, then you may find that you love those boots because your feet are warm. At 12 degrees, I don't know that you're going to have a big problem with cold. It's only when you get down to below 8 degrees, 6 degrees, 4 and colder that becomes a real issue for you.
I don't think that Mount Gambier is always around 12 or 13
Always
degrees.
the same, yeah. Yeah, between
Still,
12 and 15, I think.
I get cold very easily.
Mm-hmm.
I struggle even at 16, 17 degree.
Yeah.
Also, these days also looking at heating system as well.
Yeah, well, that Halo 3D, I'd be surprised if you needed something, but I'd have a look at what you're wearing underneath that as well. If you're diving fourth element, I also dive J2s underneath.
I wear it as well.
And then they have a zero therm. So it shows how intelligent you are that you're purchasing the right gear, hey?
Oh, no, I think I was very lucky to have fellow divers all experienced. And I had a lot of opportunities where I can borrow and test their gears.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't many female divers. There's just one. Yeah, I borrowed her stuff. But yeah, I think I was lucky in that I was able to try a lot of different gears and buy the right one right away, not trying different ones and then waste my money.
Yeah, I agree with that because all of the older divers have garages full of old gear that we don't dive anymore that we've sort of tried. And there'd be literally thousands of dollars of equipment, which is a bit sad, but it's just a way of life. You just have to kind of accept it. But if you can do the research and work on gaining experience through other people as well, then that's absolutely a smart way to go. You made a comment there, let's dig into that for a moment, that there's not a lot of women involved in the sort of diving that you're doing. Why do you think that's the case, and what can we do to encourage women to get into diving?
Can I be honest?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's just my observation, but even young female divers I've seen, they're mostly not married or single.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard when you have a kid first.
Yes. Also,
another thing is tech dives, it's not easy to carry all the stuff and organize things for women, I think. I personally think I'm stronger than most women, but I still struggle moving things and carry things stuff.
Yep. That reflection is something that kind of resonates with me because I think to some of the really good female divers that I know, and They're immensely strong. Audrey Cadell, she's a very slight woman, and yet I've never seen her struggle carrying 2 cylinders, one on each shoulder, down the steps She is immensely strong. Oh, yeah, and she's an amazing diver. No problem whatsoever. And I don't even want to guess what she weighs, but she's immensely strong. And there was another good friend who is not a technical diver here in New Zealand, but I remember once we were struggling along a beach. I was carrying 2 cylinders and she had one on her back, and she offered to carry my other cylinder for me. So I must have been looking like I was struggling. It was summer and I was in my dry suit, in my defense, right? And again, immensely strong. And so I think fitness is certainly a part of it. And it's not that you absolutely have to be strong, but I think there is an element of fitness that you need. And that goes to guys too, you know. I mean, it's no fun struggling with gear all the time. So it's worthwhile working on that and being fit and strong, because it makes things easier for sure. Yeah. You raised the kids thing too. And I remember back when my kids were young, I wasn't doing a lot of diving. So that is an issue for parents across the board, but certainly for women, for young mothers. It is really hard when your life is engaged to such a high degree and bringing up your kids. It's hard to get away and go diving for sure.
Yeah, it is definitely. Also expensive hobby as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gave up buying all the clothes and stuff, start spending money on equipment. And yeah, like I think I financially struggled at first. There was time when I just wanted to give up because of all the expensive equipment. And it was stolen one day. Like I left my stuff in my car, and then it was all stuff in it, which I think it was around $3,000 equivalent. And yeah, it wasn't even mine. So I was like, is this sport really for me? Am I doing something that I don't deserve this sport? That type of mindset caught me up.
Yeah, that's tough when you have a setback like that as well. And there's no doubt it is expensive. I think it harps back to the fact that you do have to invest in your base equipment and your base training. And then once you've got that sorted, though, I remember for quite a few years, once I'd got myself set in Sidemount, and I had my regulators, my cylinders, my XDEEP harness and dry suit and so on. And then I didn't even have a very good dry suit. So I started diving with a Scuba Pro EverDry 4, you know, it was good enough. Actually, I dived that for a long time. So it's now a bit ruined, but it was good for the beginning. So what I used to do is just dive and buy the best equipment I could afford. And then later on, as I had a bit more resources, I'd sort of say, oh yeah, I really need that shearwater computer. So I'd go and get the shearwater computer. And I need a better dry suit. Let's go and do that. So then you can kind of incrementally move on. But clothes aren't that important, are they?
This is important.
You can just wear your XDEEP hoodie. You need that and a couple of T-shirts and you're fine, right?
Yep. But I think another thing that keeps me going is now that I have all my gears and stuff, like because of the price that I paid, I really want to practice and use the best out of it.
Yeah, I hear you. Now you need to get it back. I'm the same with my rebreather at the moment, so I'm trying to dive it as much as I can because I'll never get that money back. Trust me. But well, one day I will, I'm sure. But yeah, no, I understand completely. So we sort of covered some of the barriers. Yeah, what do you think we can do to make diving more accessible for women, or encourage more women to take up diving?
I don't know. For personally, cost was one of the things that made me hesitated several times. Also, personally, I'm interested in like collecting data and making things logical. So I was interested in some algorithms and theories behind it as well. I've heard Simon Mitchell. I think
he's
really
New Zealand. Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed his videos, and that's another thing that got me interested.
Do you have a science background or?
No, not science, but I work as a data analyst.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm exactly the same way, and science has always interested me. And it was one of the exciting aspects about diving was the fact that there's this marine environment, which I loved, but there was the science aspect to it, which still to this day interests me. You know, I've been an engineer part of my life as well, and not so much the real high-end math behind it. That's not so interesting to me anymore, but understanding how things work, and also enjoy the process side of it as well. So I enjoy learning. And of course, as you know from listening to Simon Mitchell and others, decompression theory is a very imprecise science. It's all based on anecdotal evidence, and there really is no right way to do it that works all of the time for every person in every circumstance. So it's a very individual thing. And what we're relying on is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dives over many, many years, and saying, hey, this seems to be what works most of the time. And even then you can get caught out. So we're all relying on that and we're all contributing to that data set as we continue to do dives. But it doesn't mean that on any given day it won't work out. So that in itself is sort of interesting to delve into that and to find ways to optimize it. But the same thing applies when you look at cave diving. What interested me about that was the process and the equipment you needed and the rules that were applied to it and how you applied those rules and processes on a dive and how important it was. And of course, the consequences of not following them and then having a problem are immense. And all of those rules are written in blood. Somebody has died for most of them. So not so much the gory aspect of that, but more the fact that if you follow these rules, this can be done quite safely was just immense to me. And I really loved that in the skill set. So let's delve into that a bit more. Darren mentioned that you're working really, really hard on skills and trim, and you're already achieving a really high standard. Talk us through how you got started with that and how you incrementally improved yourself.
So this may be a little bit weird, but I wasn't really interested in watching things under the water, like fish. So I started to lose a little bit of interest because it's all same site and same dive. And then after I got into Sidemount, there were a lot of variables and different equipments that I could explore. So every dive sort of became interesting because every dive I have something to do or something to figure out, or I have set my goal and see if it works. So I think that's what got me into practice things and try new stuff. And then I think that's what made me progress maybe in a short period of time, relatively.
Yep. Again, that resonates really well with me because I'm exactly the same. I get really bored quite easily. And so I need something in the dive to interest me. I am interested in marine life. I'm not very interested in small stuff. Like I like seeing big fish and love seeing sharks and whales and dolphins and hanging in one spot and trying to find a little nudibranch or something doesn't do it for me. I love videography, but I don't like photography. So what I did for a long time was my dives were really about me and about, just like you're saying, how do I get better and how do I improve myself? Every moment of the dive, I'm thinking about how do I do this better? How do I be more stable? How do I be still? How do I be in better trim? How do I propel myself better? How can I go backwards better? How can I get through this hole a little better? And then the other thing I'm doing now, almost every dive is part of a project. And I'm doing lots of video projects on the Canterbury Rec right now, which I just love doing. And so I set myself a task and I'm thinking about how I'm going to capture the shots that I'm going to capture. And I'm thinking about how do I get into a really small space on the wreck without messing it up so I destroy the video. That makes it more challenging. And the rebreather's been helping me, but I'm still learning that as well. So it's super interesting for me again. And not that I was getting bored before, but everything was pretty easy and open circuit side mount after 5 or 6 years of doing it. So that's what I do. It sounds like you're very, very similar in that respect.
So is someone videotaping you or someone gives you like feedback every time? Or
to be honest, I would love that. And I did get a little bit of that in Gozo and I would highly recommend that. But quite often I'm, just because of the nature where I am now, this will be heresy, but I tend to dive by myself quite a lot just because there's either no one else with me who can go where I want to go, or they can't dive to the same level, or I'm there to do a video project and who wants to hang around with Steve while he's setting up lights and cameras and everything, and they've just got to sit in the corner somewhere while they wait for me. It's kind of like I'm the buddy of a photographer type deal. Quite often I'm just on my own and I'm off doing my project, and in the comfort that I've got nearly 40 years of experience, but not all of that's tech experience, but I've got a lot of tech diving experience and I've got the equipment and I've got the knowledge of where I am and I'm completely self-sufficient. So it's not that having a buddy isn't a good idea. And for many people in diving, it's a great idea and you should do that. But in terms of getting feedback, especially now that I'm on the rebreather, I'd love to have someone who could do that. And I may ask some of my friends, hey, can you grab a camera and just shoot me for a while? It's really good for business from the point of view of having a promo video when you happen to get it right, but also to capture when you're not getting it right and to get that incremental improvement. So I would recommend for you, for your diving, that you get as much video taken of you almost every dive, even if it's, hey, I'm trying to practice this right now. Can you just grab a camera and shoot me for 2 minutes while I try and do this, whether it's a particular drill or whether you're trying to be stable or still or go backwards or whatever, and then have a look at what's going on. I certainly do it on all my courses. Almost every moment, every skill, everything gets videoed. It's a great feedback tool and you can learn really quickly from seeing that.
Yeah, that has been a little bit challenging. Like always after the dive, I'm thinking like I wish I could see myself under the water. But unless someone shooting a video of myself, it's hard to know what I have.
Do you have a GoPro yourself or something like that?
No.
It might be a good investment because number one, it's quite fun shooting video. But number two, you can just hand them the camera and say, here, can you shoot me? And then take the camera back off them when they're done. So then they don't feel like it's a task. Or either that, or do you know someone with a GoPro? Perhaps your partner needs to get one. That might be a good idea.
He has one, but I cannot ask him every time.
Of course you can. Why not?
Yeah.
Perhaps I can issue an instruction or directive that each dive he should video you at least for a couple of minutes so that you get some feedback.
Yeah. But is there any like GoPro, which, we use selfie stick?
Mm-hmm.
But does that work under the water?
The big one does, because I'm by myself quite a lot. I'm using the big, long, extendable arm one that goes out for about a meter. So that one is actually quite good and it folds up. I actually dived that quite deep and it didn't blow up. I was wondering if it was going to because it's got a thread that threads the tripod into it. So I was a bit worried about that, but I flooded it first and then screwed it back in. And I never had an issue with it until it just fell apart. It was really old. And you can hold that out and selfie yourself quite well. The other thing you can do is set the tripod up. And if there's not a lot of surge, then you can just set the tripod up and swim away from it and do some skills in front of it. So I've done that. Yep. There's actually one called the Shorty, and which I have, which is not long enough to film yourself very effectively, but is great to set up as a tripod. And then the bigger one becomes quite tall. And as I said, if there's any water movement, it tends to fall over. But you can just set that up and set the camera and do it yourself. That might be another option. And that's what I tend to do because I don't always have somebody who can video.
Yeah.
So let's talk about where you want to take your diving. We started to talk a little bit about cave diving and just describe what you see in your future over the next few years.
Well, I was supposed to do a cave course early March, but obviously because of coronavirus, I couldn't do that. Hopefully I'm do the cave diving course in November, December this year. Because for CDAA rule, it has to be after a year since I got open water. Right. So after that, I want to see how it goes, but would love to dive in different sites in different countries, especially like warm countries. Sure. But at the moment, it will be impossible. But hopefully I can dive in like Bali or one of the sites that I would love to dive is Blue Hole. Yes.
Oh, in Dahab.
I just saw the flag. Yeah.
So in places like Dahab and even in Bali, I mean, one of my guests many episodes back, it was Yvonne Press, who runs her own dive business there in Bali. So there are places that you can go where there's people who'll be able to look after you as a side mount diver as well and support you. So reach out to me if you're going somewhere or have a look back through the episodes. I haven't interviewed anyone directly from Dahab who's there right now, but Tom Steiner owned a shop there for a while. Eric Brown actually bought the shop from Tom and ran that for a long time before he went to Koh Tao in Thailand. And so there's another place, Thailand, there'll be people who can support you there. And I know there's many through Asia now. There's many in especially not so much the west coast of the US, but certainly on the east coast in Florida in particular, there's a lot of places you can go that have seen side mount a lot. Obviously Mexico. And then in Europe, Gozo is a great example. Gozo Technical and Audrey's at Atlantis there now. So there's plenty of places where you can dive nice warm water as well. But often, as I've described on the podcast, if you end up going to the Pacific Islands or something, which is the closest for us, or if you go to Queensland for that matter in Australia, you may find that you've got to make your own way and you've got to sort of tell them what you want to do. And you'll definitely be diving aluminium cylinders or aluminum cylinders. So you have to be prepared for dealing with those. And again, I've done quite a few episodes on how you do that and what you should do. But again, reach out if you want to ask a question when you get there. But it's fun. I love traveling and diving side mount, and it's really lightweight in terms of travel as well. Harness doesn't weigh very much, and so you can travel really light.
So I heard Mount Gambier has pretty tough conditions compared to other dive sites. Is it true?
I don't think so. No. It depends where you go, but I've dived a bunch of sites there when we were there with Reef to Ridge last year, and compared to what we normally do, the access is reasonably easy. Often you've got a few stairs or ladders that you've got to deal with, so that's a little bit tough. And then the water temperature is cool to 15. You've got to be prepared for that. But once I call that cool as opposed to cold.
Yeah, okay.
With cold being under 10 degrees, let's say.
I think it's reasonably easy. You jump in a car and you drive to the site and you unload your gear and carry it down and you're in the water. I think that's a lot easier than jumping on a boat and pounding out through waves for an hour to a dive site and then trying to get in the water out of the boat. So I found Mount Gambier quite easy. But having said that, there's sites where you need vertical access. Can't remember the name of the cave, but we did a vertical access dive there where you had to use single rope technique to get in and out. That was a course that we did with Rob at Reef to Ridge as well. That was fun. It was not really my thing. I wouldn't necessarily go after that. I think Ewan's Ponds, it's a better site for me, or certainly going to Kilsby was fantastic. And getting into Tank Cave, you've got to go down a ladder. So you lower your cylinders down that ladder and there's a little low. You can walk through it, but you've got to duck your head down to get down to where you enter the water. So that's a little bit tricky, but not very difficult at all. What else? Engelbrecht, you've got quite a long walk to carry your gear down. So there's a lot of steps. But again, it's walking them down and walking them back up. So that's a bit of physical effort for sure. But just choose your sites, and where you want to go. And
yeah, I just can't wait to do the cave course and hopefully this coronavirus ends soon. And
I know, and I've been talking so much about New Zealand and coronavirus, and we had been doing really, really well, and we've got a second outbreak happening right now. Yeah. It's kind of contained. So again, the government's been, I think, really good at shutting everything down again, and they've got it contained to what we call one cluster. So everyone who's infected at the moment has come from this one group, and they're all in quarantine now. But every day there's new cases coming from their close contacts, so from their family members and so on, and eventually it'll grow to whatever size it does and then hopefully stop. But we're at what we call level 2, which means that we can still dive. Level 3, we can't. So we're just hoping that remains contained. And then the other hope, of course, is that we don't go through this kind of death by a million cuts where we're clean for 3 to 6 months and then all of a sudden another outbreak happens and we're back to shutdowns and then we're clean and shut down. And we need a vaccine is really the answer. And so we're praying for that, I guess, huh? What else can we talk about?
Another question that I wanted to ask was, do you use butt plate?
No, I don't. The butt plate's there for a few different purposes. So usually it comes with rails on it. So there's a rail on each side of the butt plate. And so if you look at some of the Florida harnesses in diving steel cylinders in fresh water, they are quite negative, especially when they're full. And so you find that you need to attach the base of the steel cylinder or the bottom attachment a fair way back to make sure that it's not hanging low. And so a butt plate can be really effective for doing that with rails, and many side-mount harnesses do have butt plates and rails for that reason. With the Stealth 2.0, they also come with drop attachments, which many have, which are kind of multi-purpose, the square attachments at the back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can use the square attachments for the same purpose. So if you want to, you can, especially when the cylinders are full, you can clip them onto the drop attachments, which takes them a fair way back. The other time you might use it is it's a good place to attach argon cylinders for suit inflation. You can attach a canister light on the butt plate too. So they do have their uses, but you can attach them to your crotch strap if you need to as well. Having said all of that, I do have a butt plate on my Stealth 2.0 that I use for my rebreather for the Sidewinder. And the reason for that is I am carrying an O2 cylinder, a 2-litre one, so it's reasonably large. And I do have my canister light there as well. So they both are on the butt plate, and that makes it much more stable. But if I was diving open circuit, I would not be using a butt plate. I'd simply use the drop attachments if I needed to put my cylinders right back. But most of the time, even in fresh water, I'm just using my sliding D-rings and just pushing them right back at the beginning of the dive and then just easing them forward as they become more buoyant later in the dive, which has been great for me.
So would divers' height matters more?
In terms of using the butt plate, I think it might be easier if you're a bit taller. It's still going to sit on your butt. You still want the lumbar node to be in your lumbar spine. Yes. You want the shoulder node to be between your shoulder blades. And so once you get the length right on the harness itself, the butt plate from there is still going to sit on your butt. I just don't think it'll go quite as far. And maybe a taller diver might find that's more useful. Sometimes the girth of a diver also makes a difference. So I'm relatively, I guess you'd call it slim. So I don't have a lot of distance around my torso for moving cylinders, but then it hasn't seemed to have been an issue for me either. So I haven't seen any of the top divers diving in Mexico and Gozo. I didn't see anyone using a butt plate there or rails or anything like that. Saltwater in Gozo and in freshwater in Mexico, we just didn't have them. At the moment, have you got one set up or not?
No, that was just one of the things that I was always wondering, do I need it or not? And I ended up not using it because I want everything to be minimal.
Yes.
Because
Yeah,
tech
less-
time already, there are just too much stuff that I need to.
So in the last episode, Steve Bogart's made a comment, less is more. And so as you're looking at your equipment, obviously you need redundancy. So there's also a saying 1 is none and 2 is 1. And sometimes you need 3 of things, but you can't overdo that. So having 4 isn't better than having 3. And sometimes having 3 isn't better than 2. So you want everything to be really simple, because the more you have, the more complex things become. And therefore, the more task loading and the more that your mind becomes occupied with gear. So you really do want to optimize. So I went through a big period of just paring back everything and optimizing as much as I can and trying to take things off, just have what's necessary with me. And I try not to carry anything extra. I know Steve Martin, for instance, carries a little toolkit. And on certain dives, that can be useful. If something goes wrong underwater, you're in a cave, for instance, it might be nice to be able to do a little repair. But again, if you're doing that, you want it to be really small and really tight and not obtrusive. Think that through on everything that you do and try and apply that simplicity and less is more principle.
Speaking of redundancy, do you use transmitter?
I do.
So do you bring SPG as well as a backup, or?
That's an interesting topic, and I did some work with Shearwater a while back on the use of transmitters, and I wrote an article that didn't end up getting published, but it was really my exploration of transmitters. And I did 2 things. I researched the market to see what other divers were doing, and guys like, again, Steve Bogart's, and there were quite a few others who had been using transmitters for quite a long time in cave diving and in sidemount diving. And then there was also a lot of my friends here in New Zealand that were using transmitters on rebreathers. There's a few points to cover in that. Firstly, you need it to be reliable. So there was a big question for a long time about the reliability of transmitters. Could you trust them? Because we've used SPGs for a long time and we know that they're trustworthy. They don't fail very often. They can fail, but that doesn't tend to happen very often. And if they do fail, because it's the HP hose, it's not a big deal. You don't lose a lot of gas out of an HP hose compared to an LP hose if it has a leak. So it's not a big risk. And so SPGs have been very reliable and very good. So transmitters are the next generation, and we really do want to be open to new technology, but it's obviously got to work. So I think the thing that has happened is transmitters have become incredibly reliable. I've been diving them now for nearly 2 years, and I have not really had any major failure. Obviously, the batteries go flat, so you need to check the battery level, but I have never had an issue where the transmitters just stopped working on me, nor have I had a leak. The other question then is, okay, the transmitters are reliable. Should I have a transmitter and an SPG just in case the transmitter fails? Then the argument about less is more comes in. Now I've doubled up on my failure points, so the risk has increased of me having a failure. But the benefit is that if I have a transmitter failure, my SPG there is a backup. And you say, okay, how much value is that backup? What are you going to do? So you might say, okay, if I've got a leak and that's what's happened, then I need to end the dive anyhow, right? So I should call the dive. If a transmitter stopped working, then you say, okay, the transmitter stopped working, now I have an SPG. I could probably carry on with the dive because my backup, my redundancy has come into play. But how often do these things fail? Not that often. And let's think about, as a side mount diver now as well, this is perhaps something else to think about, is I always play little games with myself, and before I check my gas levels, what do I think it is right now? And I say, I think I've got 145 bar, and I have a look, and I'm usually within 5 bar of where I think I am. And you should be aware of what your gas pressure is. Remember, you only checked it a few minutes ago. Certainly I'm checking before every regulator switch. Because you checked just a few minutes ago, you should know what your gas pressure is. The other thing that you should know is that I am always within my gas contingency. So I haven't consumed so much gas that if I call the dive now, I know that I have enough gas to exit the cave, to exit the wreck, and to get to the surface. Obviously, it's concerning that I don't know how much gas I've got, but provided I control my consumption, my gas consumption, and control my breathing, and control myself mentally, I should be able to exit whatever I'm doing and have enough gas to conclude the dive, because I haven't gone past my third or past whatever gas rule that I'm following. So, it's not the end of the world if you lose your gas pressure. You should call the dive. You should never carry on in that circumstance, but you'll have enough to get out. So for that reason, I actually don't even have the transmitters on hoses, which I've seen many people do, is put them on a hose. And the reason for that is that it just introduces another failure point. Now I've got a swivel as well as having a connection to the first stage, where if I just screw it straight into the first stage, I only have one failure point, which is the HP connection. which again, I haven't had one of those ever fail. If it did fail, I'd call the dive. If it was really bad, I'd shut that cylinder down and then feather it if I needed to, or just dive on the other cylinder. Again, you have to be comfortable with the decisions you make. I've kind of applied this technology is reliable, less is more. If I have a failure, I'm calling the dive. I'm comfortable. I can exit and get back to land, back to safety, whatever it is. And I've made those decisions. Now, what I do, however, is I carry 2 SPGs in my spares bag. So as I'm doing my pre-dive checks, if I say, oh, this transmitter's not working, or, oh, I don't know what's going on, then I can very easily swap out a transmitter for an SPG and I can carry on diving. It's a bit expensive to have 4 transmitters, so it's better to have 2 transmitters and 2 SPGs.
Yes, right.
Make sense?
Yeah, as a beginner or new diver, it's always challenging to decide what equipment suits me, or what setup should I go with. Even trying to find information from the website or Googling, sometimes I can get misinformed, right?
Yes.
Is there any golden rule?
That's partly why I started Speaking Sidemount, because social media is wonderful, but it can be bad as well. There's so many voices out there that you don't know which one to listen to. So part of Speaking Sidemount was not about me, by the way, either. Yes, I have a voice and I have opinions, and I've done a lot of diving and a lot of sidemount diving, but I wanted to get the world's best sidemount divers and say, hey, what do you think? And so these are questions I've asked of others. Again, I can't remember how many I asked about the transmitters, but in past episodes, I know I did that. And of course, part of that transmitter deal was driven by computer choice, and that you have to have a computer that's capable. And I dive a Terek and also a Nerd, both of which have AI capability. And so that was the first step, saying, okay, I have a computer that can do this. Now, is there value in transmitters? I mean, it's not a big deal checking an SPG, to be honest, but it is so cool having the readout right on your wrist or in your eye line, especially if you're busy or task loaded or just need to have a quick look. And so it's as simple as looking down or looking up for my Nerd.
Yeah, I just wanted to know which point I breathe more or breathe less. And I wanted to see how I consume my air.
Yeah. Well, the beauty of, again, with the shearwater computers is it does a sac rate calculation for you as well. I mean, it's being kind of lazy because the math is really easy, but it's pretty cool to say, oh, yeah, I consumed this many bar from this cylinder, and seeing how that worked and then saying, okay, this was my sac rate. That's really good information to have for every dive as part of your dive log. And you can say, yeah, hey, I worked really hard on that dive. What was my sac rate? Oh, that dive was really cruisy and easy. What was my sac rate? This one was in between. What was my sac rate? How does it work over time? You should see your sac rate diminish as you become more comfortable and more relaxed, because that's what good diving is about. Then, especially cave diving, then you say, oh, yeah, okay, I can see that happening. And probably what you'll see is if I get stressed, like when you first time you go into a cave, you'll probably find your sac rate goes up. You have another question?
Oh, I have so many questions. Okay, so weight pocket. I try to put as many weights on the lower back.
Yes.
So I'm using Stealth 2.0 as well. Is it better to distribute all the weights in each pocket?
It depends. So the reason that the Stealth 2.0 is designed the way that it is, with a spine pocket that has pockets for the weight, is so that you can use the weight to adjust your trim. And so what you should do is get in the water and distribute the weight a little bit the way that you think you might want it. Obviously, as you put more weight in, it needs to go somewhere. It needs to go into a pocket. But let's say you've got 7 kilos or something, you might have more weight towards the top or more weight towards the bottom, depending on what your trim is. So again, you should get in the water with it set a certain way. I tend to start out with it very much in the middle of my back, as close to what I think my center of buoyancy and gravity is. So I start from the middle and then work out to the extremes. But the reason I do that is then I get in the water, I get myself into a correct tech diver position and trim, and then I relax and see what happens. And then do my feet go down and my head comes up? Does it happen quickly or slowly? Or does my head go down and my feet go up? And does that happen quickly or slowly? If you're wearing a dry suit with just enough gas in your dry suit to take the squeeze off, not too much. Depending on which way you go, you might say, oh, I need to move a little bit of weight up, or I need to move a little bit of weight down. And so the next dive, or if you can get back to shore and just pop a weight in, let's say you just go out to 2 or 3 meters, do a trim check, and then have some weight sitting close by, you can go back and go, yeah, I need to just move a little bit from the bottom. You can even have your buddy do that. You can just undo the bungees and reach under and take a weight out and put it up the top, or the other way around, take it from the top and put it in the bottom. So by doing that, you can use weight to adjust your trim. And diving a wetsuit, that's really important, because you don't have any other way to adjust your trim. In a dry suit, if you get it close enough, you can use the gas in your dry suit to adjust your trim really nicely by moving the gas bubble around. Make sense?
It would take a lot of time for me to get that level.
Not really. If you're in a dry suit now, the first thing is get the weighting as close as you can possibly get it. And then if you find, hey, my feet are going down just a little bit, my head's coming up a little bit, all you need to do is like lift your legs up and drop your shoulders down a little bit. And I'm always doing this. If you imagine a tightrope walker, and they're always doing this, one arm's going one way, arm's going the other way, arms coming in, arms going out. So you can just by extending your legs or extending your arms out, lifting your shoulders up, you can move the gas bubble around. By having more gas in your shoulders, you'll lift your head up. By having more gas in your legs, you'll lift your legs up. I'll make little small adjustments to get myself into trim using the gas in my dry suit. You just have to think about it. Once you do it and practice it a little bit, I think it comes quite quickly and you'll find it's an amazing thing diving a dry suit. That's one of the best parts about diving a dry suit, apart from being warm, is that you can use it as a trimming device. Have a crack at that. I think you'll like it. But the first thing is to get the weighting right. Your cylinder position is another thing that will affect your weighting. So depending on the position of your lower band, that changes where the first stages and valves are, and that's a lot of weight. So even moving that weight just down a little bit or up a little bit, clearly it should be under your shoulder, but having it down a couple of centimeters or up a couple of centimeters won't make too much difference, but it can adjust your trim by moving the cylinders up and down on your body as well. So if you find you're out of adjustment on your spine pocket, then that might be another thing that you might explore before you go to using trimming weights, which is the other thing. I remember when I was in a wetsuit in Gozo, I had to put a trimming weight on my butt quite low down. It was in my crotch strap when I was diving 4 cylinders because just the weight of the valves and first stages was so great. I'd go head down, especially with trimix as well, which is very light. So I'd find that I kept going head down. It was very uncomfortable during deco. I'd have a trimming pocket as low as I could possibly put it on my crotch strap with a couple of kilos in there so that I could pull myself down. So in a dry suit, you don't have that problem. And usually when you trimix diving, you would dive a dry suit anyhow. It's just, it was super warm water there and that's what we were doing. Make sense?
Happened last weekend where my right side of the body goes up when I have same amount of gas. Still don't know why.
Yeah, that can happen. A few things to explore there is any other equipment that you have that may be offsetting weight. So quite often my light head, for instance, that's about 400 grams and that will make a difference. The other thing is that if your harness is not completely square on you, and so it can offset a little bit to one side or the other, or if your cylinder trim is slightly different, one's up, one's down, that's where video can be really good. You just scan around with the video, say, hey, I feel like I'm falling this way. Why am I falling that way? And just have a quick look around. It will be one of or combination of you've got a little bit of offset weight somewhere that you don't realize, or your cylinders are not trimmed correctly, or they're trimmed correctly, but your harness isn't square on your body. You maybe when you're dressing, just get someone to come around behind and just have a quick check, put it square on your back and you'll video it again and see if it's square on you. That can happen. It doesn't take very much for it to be around to one side. That will cause an issue.
I had canister on my left side. Could that be a reason?
It could be a reason. Yeah, my light will make a difference. And I use that to my advantage sometimes. There are times, for instance, when you dive in 3 cylinders where you're just going to be a little bit offset at times on one side. My light's quite heavy, and so I move that around. The position of the battery could be a reason.
Yes.
I have that on one side.
Yes.
You could move that to your butt, but you can sort of have a look at all of those things and maybe move them around. The other thing, of course, is you can use your dry suit to offset that. Again, just lift one arm up a little bit and that will offset it. If it's dramatic, you need to fix it. If it's just a little bit, then you can often, with a bit of body tension and moving the bubble around, can fix that.
Yep. Can't think of any other question.
It's great. It's nice to help, and I appreciate the questions. It's really cool to have some of that in an episode. Look, I don't have too much more. It's been really nice to meet you. I don't know if you've heard of the Young Divers group. I'll put it in the podcast notes. Robert Thomas, who was on a few episodes back in episode 53, has set up a group. Have you joined it?
Not joined, but is it UK?
I don't think it's just UK. I think it's global. They've even asked some old guys like us to kind of participate. So they don't lock old people out, which is kind of cool. And thank you for that. I appreciate that. But what it is a chance for young divers to introduce yourself, talk about what you're doing. I think it's quite motivating for other young divers to see people who are diving like them and maybe going through the same challenges or progressing really well and learning. I think it's an extremely cool initiative that Robert and I think a few others are part of it as well. And what I lacked when I was a young diver was just this access to other divers who were diving at a really high level and were able to share ideas. And then, of course, there's also the social side of it. If you want to travel somewhere, you might find that there's people that you can go meet and go dive with. So I think that would be cool as well.
Yeah, definitely would love to join that group. Yeah.
Well, look, good luck with all of your training. You are definitely on the right path and doing so many things right. Commend you for all of that. I think it's encouraging to see someone such as yourself making such great progress and doing it the right way, as I said. So congratulations and all the best. Yeah, I hope we can catch up and dive in Mount Gambier, maybe do Tank Cave together sometime or something like that, huh?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to your partner for joining as well. It was awesome to see him in the same hoodie there as well. Yeah, go XDEEP, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your name?
Nino.
Nino. Well, great to meet you both and all the best. And thanks very much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and all your advice.
Oh, you're most welcome. So thanks, and we'll catch you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for joining me on this episode. It was a real pleasure to bring Hayun Yung to you and introduce what young divers in South Australia are up to right now. I was super impressed with everything that they're doing, especially the degree of practice and attention to detail that they are applying to their diving. I'm sure it'll take them a long way, and I'm really excited to see how Hayun progresses towards becoming a cave diver a little bit later this year. Thanks so much for joining me. Thank you again to XDEEP and to all of our patrons for your support. It means so much to this podcast, and I really appreciate it. Hey, I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.